71% of voters say President Biden should not run for president again in a new Harvard Caps Harris poll. Former President Donald Trump comes out ahead of Biden, actually, in this new Hypothetical 2024 matchup survey from Emerson College. Political reporter at The Hill, Julia Manchester, and reporter at Real Clear Politics, Philip Wegmann, are here with us to discuss. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Julia, we'll start with you. Not looking good, obviously. More bad polling news for Biden. Of course, the idea that he would not run again is probably pretty laughable. But how does the Biden team respond or deal with this just constant cascade of bad news?
I think there's a couple of things happening here. Number one, we know that President Biden has a very low approval rating. On top of that, he's dealing with sky-high inflation, gas prices, unrest that we've seen politically in the country. And we're really just at a time where we're so divided as a country. And I think you're seeing that really play out in polling. And you're also seeing those frustrations with the economy and other issues reflected in that polling. As to how the Biden administration responds, look, I think you're going to continue to hear them say the president is going to run again. And, it seems like they keep on having to repeat it and repeat it. It's not something they necessarily want to be talking about, especially in a midterm election year when Democrats are on track to lose seats in the House, potentially in the Senate. So, they're in a very tricky spot here, because if the president decides not to run, we know that Democrats also have a pretty thin bench, because there's been talk about, Kamala Harris or Pete Buttigieg, and then people picking apart their flaws that they see in them as candidates. So not something the Biden administration wants to be talking about now. I expect to see them deflecting and also denying that he's not going to run.
But it's not just about political division in the country, right? Why he's polling low. It's also his own voter base in Democrats that are dissatisfied with his performance. Why do you think that is? Can you speak to that, Philip?
Well, I think that it goes to the central premise of Joe Biden's candidacy in 2020, which was that he could return the nation to normal. He framed his entire campaign around this idea that he was the only guy who could beat Donald Trump. And we might see a bit of that paradox emerging right now, because in the polling that you mentioned, yes, 71% don't want him to run again. And yet there's polling which shows that he theoretically does better, or that he would lose to Donald Trump, right? So maybe that dynamic plays itself out again, where Joe Biden can say, look, I was the only guy who could beat Donald Trump 4 years ago, and that's true again today. But again, his whole campaign was about saving the republic, about returning a steady hand of leadership to government. Obviously, half that job is only done. He was able to, defeat Donald Trump, but the 2 years of the Biden administration, as Julia mentioned, it's been one crisis after another, whether it's gas, inflation, the withdrawal from Afghanistan. The gallows humor turned out to be true that the Biden folks were joking about. They were wondering, what's next? Are we going to get a horde of locusts? Well, instead they got a baby formula shortage. So I think that this is going to be difficult for him. But yeah, he's had to face this. I remember his very first press conference. One of the first questions that Biden got was, are you going to run again in 2024, sir? He tried to laugh it off. Obviously, it bothers him, but he's not going to say no. He's not going to hint that he's a maybe, because as soon as he does that, he gives up all of his power.
Well, and Phil, isn't it? It's not clear that Trump is even going to be his opponent in 2024. I think he might fare best against Trump of all potential. He has defeated Trump once. Trump is kind of uniquely disliked by a lot of people in a way maybe literally any other person with an R next to their name might not be. And, in the last few months, I think we've seen a little bit of the Trump fever breaking, to use that terminology. Obviously, DeSantis just kind of benefiting from fawning pro-DeSantis attention in conservative circles and conservative media. What are you hearing in terms of that? Is it? My sense is that Trump people are getting a little anxious or a little nervous, realizing how rapidly DeSantis' star is rising relative to Trump's himself?
So I was in Nashville 2 weeks ago for the Faith and Freedom Coalition. It's a big evangelical conservative confab. Trump spoke there, but before he did, I pulled aside Senator Lindsey Graham and I asked him, is Trump still the leader of the Republican Party? He said, of course. I asked him about 2024, and he said that it was Trump's nomination for the taking. The only question was going to be, in Graham's mind, again, this is someone who is very close to the former president. This is someone who golfs with the former president. The only question in his mind was, is Donald Trump going to run a campaign based off of the issues, high gas prices, inflation, the withdrawal from Afghanistan, or is he going to run a grievance campaign? About an hour later, when Donald Trump takes the stage, rather than dunking on Biden for an hour and a half, Donald Trump decides to do some counter-programming on the January 6th commission, and it's not exactly the most exciting stuff. But the thing is, those social conservative evangelical voters, they love him because they got the results that they wanted. They are a core engine of the conservative wing of the party. Maybe Graham is right that the nomination is for Trump to take. DeSantis is certainly formidable, but the emerging conventional wisdom that is coming out right now among some more establishment politicos and operatives is that Joe Biden was the only Democrat who could beat Donald Trump in 2016, and Donald Trump very well may be the only Republican who could lose to him in 2024 because maybe the country at this point is just so sick and tired of the Trump show. We'll find out.
I don't think I've ever agreed with this idea that Joe Biden is the only person that could beat Trump. I think that's what the Democratic Party put out. That was the messaging because that's what they wanted us to rally behind. And I think, what happened is people voted for Joe Biden, not for Joe Biden or for Joe Biden's moderate or centrist platform. They voted for him because they voted against Donald Trump. And I think what's happening now, what you're seeing is it's not just that Joe Biden is failing. Obviously, he has some unprecedented issues in terms of inflation, COVID issues, different issues that he's battling that are much harder to get around. But I think in terms of his own legislation and his own policy initiatives, I think it's that a lot of people only voted for him to get rid of Trump. He was just the person who opposed him, and a lot of people hoped to push him left. And a lot of these different leftist policies and ideas that people had pushed on him and that he had said he would take into consideration, like student loan forgiveness and all these different things, we've seen him actively kind of speak against, right? So I think what might be happening is not just that voters are disappointed in him based on how he's handling these things. I think it's that he was always this moderate centrist pick that people weren't exactly excited about, and they're seeing that they're not really able to move him left. What do you think about that, Julia?
Look, I think you're absolutely right. And we've seen Democrats from the progressive side of the party and more moderate Democrats say that. I'll never forget the New York Times interview Abigail Spanberger, a very vulnerable Democratic congresswoman from Virginia, gave. And she said, I didn't vote for this guy to be FDR. And I think that's reflected in her district, where a lot of voters, for example, didn't vote for someone, because of his core Democratic principles necessarily. Maybe some of them did, but they wanted someone to end what they saw as the chaos of the Trump administration. Right. And you can see that can be applied to progressives as well. So, in terms of, where they go forward from here, I mean, look, like I said, I think they have a thin bench, but, it's probably time to start vetting some potential Democratic candidates or people who could, succeed President Biden. Kamala Harris is someone who is floated. However, we know that she is very much always targeted by critics, but Pete Buttigieg, for example. But I think it's time for them to start at least thinking about it, because President Biden has proved to be so vulnerable and, like Phil said, has not necessarily ended that chaos. We've only seen this really continue just in a different way during his administration.
So I guess the question I want to ask everybody is, do we think Joe Biden can turn this around? Do we think there's a chance that his polling improves? Or are there any policies or initiatives he could take up that would please his voter base or increase his approval ratings? Is there any world where you think Joe Biden can run for re-election and he can win?
What do you think, Phil?
Look at Robbie's face.
Well, I think we're going to learn a lot come 2023, because if Republicans control both chambers of Congress and then Biden can move back into his sort of negotiation role and sort of flex his congressional muscles by negotiating some compromises, and if the economy changes, then maybe he isn't as vulnerable as some folks think. There's a theory of the case that Biden having control of the Senate and Democrats, having that very slim majority there, actually made things more difficult for this president, because rather than being in a position where he had to compromise with Mitch McConnell, then it just whet the appetites of progressives and folks who were saying to him, yeah, we do want you to be FDR. We do want you to move forward with some of these more ambitious goals. I think we'll see. Compromise has not been something that Biden has wanted to do of late, but I think we'll get a clearer sense of that question when we wake up in the morning come 2023.
What do you think, Julia?
Look, I have to agree with Bill. I think we'll have to see what the appetite of voters is in 2023 is. And I think it also depends on if Biden is able to get another legislative achievement passed through, one that particularly impacts the economy. And also will depend if the economy gets better. If it gets better by 2024, that will definitely play in the president and Democrats' favor. But right now, in this moment, there's really no sign of it. So I think we'll have to be waiting.
Well, Phil, Julia, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And we'll be back with more Rising right after this.